We're going to be giving a copy of this one away when it launches on Wednesday. Let us know what you think in the comments. This series almost seemed to come as a necessity for me to channel what was a growing catalogue of very addictive games. After ticking off Ember Knights and the excellent Doomsday, I thought I might have a bit of a quiet downtime for a few weeks, and then I heard on the grapevine that Brotato was coming out on Switch on Wednesday and managed to snag an early review copy, thanks to the small indie team Blobfish and the guys over at Seven Studios. This one, on the surface, to me didn't look very impressive, but the 10 out of 10 Steam score and an overwhelmingly positive response from the community, wow, it hooked me in, didn't it? And then I saw the price. It's about £5. I mean, you could save 10% more on that using code SwitchUp over at switchup.gg, but this is no time for sales pitches. Is this one vegetable that's going to find its way right past your backlog, or is this release a low bro? Well, my name's Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp, and now let's find out. On the surface of it, the premise of Brotato is incredibly simple. It's a top-down arena-based roguelike where you control one of up to 44 different characters to try and defeat aliens within several waves. I was initially quite taken aback by the fact that by default your guns automatically aim and shoot, so you just have to move yourself around. And I quickly went into the options menu and disabled that, preferring to manually aim, but as we'll go into later, that actually ended up getting switched back. The character choices are all important here, and it's also where a lot of the longevity comes from. They're essentially 44 different classes. They have pros and cons and will lend themselves to certain layouts and builds. The standard class is a jack of all, master of none, while the ranger class is all about the distant damage. Once you've made your initial selection, you'll then choose which weapon you want to start with. And here's where things get a little bit spicy with Brotato. You can actually carry up to 6 different weapons on each run. You can switch these in and out. And if you have 2 of the same weapon, you can even combine them to create higher level versions. Once you've made your choice, you'll begin your very first run, and things will seem relatively simple. Enemies will spawn in at a steady rate, the locations of which are marked with small red X's, and any positive things will spawn with a blue X. Killing the aliens will drop some currency, and each wave will have a timer counting down. Now, one of Brotato's biggest hooks is in its speed. This is a roguelite that you can absolutely pick up and play, with each wave lasting around 20 to 90 seconds. Getting progressively longer and more difficult as you go on. Another aspect to consider are the small arena sizes, or comparatively small, and the class you choose will also affect the size of that arena, and there are pickups that can change that as well. Now, hopefully you're going to survive your first run, having collected up as much of that currency as you can, and then you'll have a choice of a permanent perk. These may increase your damage, your range, all the usual things, and sometimes you'll have the option of a trinket, which is like an additional permanent item that your character can take. Between each wave you'll enter the shop. Here you'll usually have a few weapons and some items, some of them being passive and some of them placed down here in your weapons pool. What Brotato does is reward experimentation. If you decide that you want to go for a particular style of build, it will let you do that. It tends to lean towards facilitating custom loadouts. Now, sure, you can't decide exactly what spawns in the shop, but with a relatively cheap refresh, you actually have quite a bit of control over your build as you go on. The same can be said for those end of wave rewards as well. And so begins your steady slog through several waves, with the difficulty ramping up, enemy spawn rates increasing, and you begin to pay more attention to your statistics. And if you're someone that enjoys min-maxing builds, you'll be right at home. There are statistics for almost every aspect of your character, from your percentage damage to your overall luck, as well as HP regen. Controlling your potato with the left stick is very easy. Everything's running at a silky 60 frames per second, and this is maintained in both docked and handheld mode, although I did notice a couple of moments when it stuttered down a tiny bit. It's generally very smooth, and it's a good thing because you need to be pinpoint accurate with your movement. That's where the majority of the difficulty comes. You don't have a dodge roll, you can't sprint out of the way. Aside from putting points into your overall speed, and there is also a dodge statistic as well, which will essentially roll a dice behind the scenes every time you're touched by an enemy to decide if you avoid damage. It's all down to you, and my goodness does it get frenetic. All of this is heightened with a soundtrack that seems to be able to produce pure epinephrine. You'll push further into the game through wave after wave until you reach the inevitable 20th wave. Here you'll have a choice. You can either choose to fight that 20th wave, which essentially puts you against the boss, and if you defeat them you'll get a run completion, unlocking further difficulties and enemies as well as characters, or you can stick around and play endless mode. As the title suggests, it means the game doesn't end on the 20th run, and it's all about trying to get as far as you can. Now, I mentioned that I turned the manual aiming on initially and then turned it back to automatic, and that's because if you're going for a ranged build and you're holding multiple pistols and machine guns, the computer's able to shoot in multiple directions. It's something you just cannot do if you're doing it manually. On the flip side of that, other builds benefit from manual aiming because you can shoot a path through enemies, allowing yourself an avenue of escape if you get yourself into a sticky situation. You'll have to have an experiment and see what works for you. So what about negatives then? Well, I think roguelite fans might find the lack of any meta progression to be a potential negative. This means there are no permanent upgrades. Each run is completely fresh, and aside from the unlocking of characters, as well as completing runs and then unlocking new tiers of difficulty which add in new enemy varieties, as far as those characters go, they begin each run exactly the same. Initially I wasn't really sure how I felt about this, but having played the game for several hours now, that's not really where its emphasis lies. It lies on mastering each of those character builds, and that in and of itself feels very unique. Plus it's just so flipping addictive, which is a perfect time to talk about value. Brotato will set you back just $4.99 or your regional equivalent. It fits into 241 megabytes and really is the ultimate pick up and play roguelite experience. Most runs last in under 30 minutes, most waves just a minute or two, and there are tons of accessibility options in here. You can tweak the health, the damage, the speed. It's well worth that price. Developer Blobfish and publisher Seven Studio have pulled a bit of a fast one, haven't they? Releasing Brotato at its ridiculously cheap price before Vampire Survivors comes out on Switch is a very smart move. With that perfect pick up and play arcade feel and more than enough content for most. When it releases on August the 3rd, I can see this one shooting up the eShop. Whichever way you boil, fry or slice it, Brotato on Nintendo Switch scores a well-deserved 88%. Will you be grabbing this one on launch on Wednesday, or do you value your sleep? As I said at the start, just a massive thanks to all of you that support the channel, Patreons, members, anyone that leaves comments down below and enjoys this type of content, anyone that shares it, you're supporting Glen and I, and just as always, a big thanks to all of you for all things Switch, all the time. Keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!